Hello and welcome back to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. We're your hosts. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Sean.
And we are glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. In this podcast, we talk about real sales issues, big and small, for salespeople, selling situations, and sales leadership. Collectively, we have over 50 years of sales, selling leadership, and sales acumen under our belts, and we're here to share a little bit of that with you in the next 15 minutes. We're glad you're here. Enjoy the show.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about, do you have the right people in the right seats in the bus? In other words, do you feel you have the right salespeople to get you where you want to go? This is a big question. We ask this in our sales assessments all the time when Kevin and I meet with a new client and we start talking about what their problems are. And it's not always a negative thing that you don't have the right people. It's not always a positive thing that you do have the right people. It's really a question that we have to answer and we have to go through. So Kevin, any thoughts on this as we kick off the subject?
I love the discussions that start and end with people in production, right? Because we're talking about building better businesses. That's really the genesis of what we're talking about, whether it's compensation plans, CRMs, or people, how do we get better results from our team? And this is a really appropriate time of year to be talking about right people, right seat, RPRS for all our EOS friends. This time of year, you can see Sean and I are still, we've just put on our warmer clothes so we can tell us the end of the year, we're all thinking about forecasting. So, but yeah, when it comes to the right people, I also like to think about what are they doing and how have we enabled them to be better than themselves, right? Where does 1 + 1 = 5? And so when I think about right people, right seats, often I have to start with a little bit of self-evaluation. What about you, Sean?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. One of the things I talk about, though, when I talk about, is it the right salesperson? If it's not the right, let's just talk about that segment. If it's not the right salesperson today, is that person not correct because he hasn't been trained or she hasn't been taught? She doesn't have the experience. So maybe it's not time to cut bait and move that person out. That's not always a bad thing. That's not always the thing that we're trying to accomplish here. Maybe the issue is what we really want to do is figure out how do we make that person the right person in the right seat, right? So I try to look at it from that perspective. The reality is, in this economy, you don't want to trade salespeople unless you absolutely have to. Salespeople are very expensive to hire. It takes a long time to do it in a lot of cases, unless you have a great network. It's also expensive to get them to leave their existing job. Most salespeople are readily employed, so you're not going to find people, quote unquote, on the street. You're going to find people working for somebody else. Now you got to convince them to leave that other position, that other company. That means you're going to have to pay them more in one way or another to get them to come to your company. So I would much rather, if we find out that they're not the right salesperson in the right place at the right time, I'd rather try to fix that salesperson and make that salesperson successful than try to start all over with somebody new. Kevin, what do you think about that?
I would high five you on all those points. And I think if we're going to put a really fine point on that, I'd say that, hey, people like Sean and I work for organizations that study salespeople and sales leaders, and the overwhelming majority of sales leaders and salespeople don't get annual training in any way, shape, or form. There's often been a gap of years since they had any formalized training. So then that's where we get to start talking about some of the resources. How are we resourcing our success, right? If you want a faster car, you put a bigger motor or a different transmission, right? So what are we doing to move out the old skills or improve upon those old skills so that we are more successful going forward? So investing in training, whether it's at the leadership level, the quota carrying level, or anything in between, sales enablement level. There's a real fun story I like to tell when I was working with a different company that we had a lot of people on the team, right? There's a lot of people, lots of well-heeled resources, right? People with a lot of experience. And what we found is there was one opportunity that we were really missing. That was organization around RevOps, right? And so we had a person that was responsible for some leadership and some quota. But what we found is that if we pointed him, in this case it was a he, pointed him towards RevOps and said, let's focus on these key initiatives just on the RevOps side, it turns out we released our rainmakers and our hunters to go and really be wildly productive because they weren't bogged down with RevOps. So the right people, right seat doesn't necessarily mean a change in personnel. Sometimes it means they're already on your bus. You just got to get them moved over into the right seat. I see that a lot, especially when we're talking about growing sales teams. How do you help growth? Well, sometimes you have to subordinate some of the tasks to RevOps or something else, or elevate tasks and get somebody keenly focused on a new emerging market. That's typically my take. I'm a half full kind of guy. What about you, Sean?
I dislike taking somebody out of the company completely, right? A lot of times they have great skills that they've already developed. They may be lacking some skills. I also look at this a little bit from a prior sales manager before I come into a company. Did they have the skills, whoever was leading that sales team, did they actually have the skills to make that salesperson, that potential salesperson, a great salesperson? So I don't want to, break my arm by patting myself on the back, but the reason you hire me, the reason they hire you, Kevin, is to make that salesperson be successful. So I've actually told clients that we're thinking about putting somebody on plan, or maybe they'd already put them on plan, and we should probably talk about what that means. I said that has to be taken. You have to take care of that yourself, right? You either have to take that person off a plan, so I'll reevaluate them after I've put them through some paces, or if you really don't want that person anymore, then you just got to get that person out before I even really do anything with you. Because don't ask me to fix the problem as it's going over the cliff, right? I'm not what I'm here, right? So let's talk about, what does performance improvement plan, what does that mean? Because that's part of the process of right person, right job, right? So how do you typically handle that within companies that you work with?
So I'm going to borrow and steal. So I say a lot with customers, I'm going to R&D this. I'm going to rip off and deploy somebody else's best practice. I had a mentor one time, and he said it kind of like this. He said, I'm going to paint the picture of the success in the future for us, and that includes you. And I'm going to do everything I can to help get you there. But if you can't get you there on your own, you can't stay. Right? So phrasing it around like, hey, I'm going to open up the world of opportunities and tools to you, but you've got to do the personal work to help get yourself there. So when we talk about PIPs or PIPs or performance improvement plans, same thing. So I think that's a really key understanding for anyone in a leadership position, whether you're responsible for corporate, divisional, or individual quotas, right, or some sort of revenue. You need to understand that's a tool you can use, but it should not be the first tool you use.
Right.
So this really leads into the question of, do you feel you have the right salespeople to get you where you want to go, right? So leadership, is the first course of action. Have you set appropriate goals? Have you set appropriate targets? Are you incentivizing people with the right compensation plans to incentivize the behaviors you want? Because if you want me to go out and sell for you, and you're paying me a flat commission, I'm going to find the thing that sells the fastest. Right?
And that may not be what you want me to sell as a salesperson, because you have a screwed up compensation plan, right? So the success, I think and we still have a few more minutes, but I do kind of want to put a little bit of a bow on this. The success of your salesperson and the sales team, when we come in, or anybody that's going to come in as a fractional advisor, we may or may not agree with your assessment on that person because the infrastructure isn't there, the systems aren't there, the processes aren't there, the methodologies aren't there, maybe not even what that salesperson should be saying to the prospect. Maybe you don't even have your value pitch, your unique selling proposition knocked down and locked in. And maybe that's why that salesperson is not being successful. Maybe they're just doing the wrong way of prospecting. Maybe there's a lot of little things that they could be doing wrong that could be putting them in a situation where they're not being successful. And that's why when I come in, I'm like, that's my job, is to make all those problems go away. If that salesperson is not being successful after that, well, then we can start talking about that salesperson needs to step up. But I'm already going to be working with them because I'm going to find those problems out too, and I'm going to point them in the right direction.
Yeah, because I think at our core, we are people who invest in people, right? We want to change people before we have to change people.
Exactly.
The first question we ask is, first question I ask myself is, can they do the job? Are they doing the behaviors that are successful for the job? And then if they can do it and they are trying, then we can say, well, upskilling.
Right.
Do they need to do it differently? Can we help point them, mold them, shape them into better versions of themselves? And that's really, at the end of every day, when I'm dead and gone, I want to be remembered for the guy who helped people get better at their craft. That's the legacy I want to leave when it comes to sales management, and helping get the right people in the right seat.
Yeah. And now, that doesn't mean that, at least for me, after I've worked with that person for a while, that you're guaranteed you're going to keep your job. And that may not be the case, right? Well, we're going to assess that on an individual basis. I'm sorry. And also, I am eventually going to say, now it's time to top grade the company, right? Let's talk about bringing in talent that is more talented, because now we have all these systems to make people successful. Let's bring in some new talent that does maybe raise the boat, raise the tide for everybody. And maybe that person that's on the bottom now is really on the bottom a year later or whatever. But now it's because we have new talent that is just so much better. And now we can really see the difference in what our hiring practices should have been a couple of years ago, and they just weren't there, and now they are, right? Because that's the other thing I'm going to do, is I'm going to fix the hiring practices and the expectations of who is coming into the company and make sure they're going to be successful.
Yeah. So for the CEO that feels they do have the right people, I think we need to help them understand, as part of this, kind of putting a bow on this, for the ones that do think they have the right people, what should they also do to ensure they reach goals? And for the ones who think they may not, how do they put some real concrete barriers around a path to getting the right people? My personal opinion is, if you've got what you think are the right people, make sure that we're pointing them in the right direction of success, sharing, communicating the goals, ensuring the training is there, doing things like ride-alongs. It's amazing what you will learn as a leader by being present for the sales process. Separately, for the ones who may think they don't have the right people on the bus, figure out what your key sales process is, and then figure out where they're not meeting those behaviors. And then you got some real numbers to say, well, to put around, do I have the right people, or do I have a bad process, or do I have an absence of process where everybody's kind of doing their own thing? You?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we're getting close to the end here, but not recently, a little while ago, I had a client that was talking to me, and we hadn't signed the contract yet. And he's like, I'm really tempted tomorrow to fire my entire sales force. And I was like, don't do that. That's not going to help your company at all. But I understand you're upset. I understand you're frustrated. Let me come in. Let me kind of do an evaluation. At the end of my evaluation, at the end of the time that I worked with them, one person did leave because they really did need to go. They hadn't been successful for a long time. It was just too little, too late. But nobody else did. Nobody else had to go. They just had to get the right motivation, the right skills, the right comp plan, the right messaging just had to be put in place. Call on the right accounts that were going to buy, as opposed to calling on accounts that weren't going to buy. All of those issues had to be addressed. So a good sales management system can come in and fix all those things and make all this happen. And we are right at our 15 minutes right now. So I think we need to wrap up.
Yeah. Well, to put a bow on everything, I think the takeaway here is plan your work and work your plan. And if you need help doing that, Sean and I would love to have that conversation with you.
Exactly. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much for attending this session on Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. We hope that we have been able to impart some wisdom, give you some guidance, give you some ideas to think about. If you do have other questions that you would like to ask, do us a favor, drop a note down in the comments, and so we can pick it up and we'll talk about it in a future episode. Thank you very much. Happy selling.